Welcome to AHDB's Strategic Cereal Farm Programme. Since 2017, AHDB have been working with farmers around the country to demonstrate research and practice on commercial farms. Using a range of field-scale trials, replicated tramline trials and large plot-scale trials, our strategic farmers have been demonstrating research on a range of topics across integrated pest management and the environment. Using on-farm trials in this way is a really useful way of testing whether something could work for you and your business. So I hope that you enjoyed this short video tour of our farms in Suffolk, Warwickshire and Fife, as our host farmers and the researchers that we've been working with for Harvest 2021 tell you about the latest results. And I hope that you're inspired to try something new on your own farm.
Hi, I'm Brian Barker, Strategic Farmer for the East here in Suffolk at EJ Barker & Sons. We've been looking at how we can lower our inputs, how we can get the most out of the varieties that we're growing. We're looking at the integrated pest management, so what we can do for natural biodiversity, making sure that our farming operation is not having an adverse effect onto the farm landscape around us. We've been looking at nitrate levels, we're looking at cover crops, and now with the other strategic farms across the country coming on, putting their own spin onto these topics, it's great to see that we can actually bring information from the East and compare it with the others around the country. Here at EJ Barker & Sons in Suffolk, we've had a bang on 5-year average yield, but then that's offset by the increased prices that we're seeing at the moment, which means that we're probably going to have a above average year when it comes down to looking at net margin and gross margin and profits at the end of the day, which is good for us. But also we're now looking at how the impacts going forward are going to be. We obviously see that the fertilizer prices have gone up recently, input costs, fuel costs, these are all going to have a adverse effect when we look at next year's cropping. And so there's got to be some real detailed analysis of how we're going to take the crops which have gone in the ground forward to make sure that we're maintaining our profit levels for the following years. Harvest was drawn out. It was quite hard work. It was very late in the east and there's a few people still struggling with some late crops around here in late September and October. We got on nicely, decided to actually get the crops into the store and pay a little bit extra for drying them where required. And so that's going to be an added cost at the end of the day. But I was happy with the quality that we got from our harvest. All the spring barley, winter wheat came in with good quality and good specs, so we're seeing an uplift in price for the specialist markets that we're meeting around the country. The drilling season for the new crops going in the ground has been one of enjoyment after the last 2 years. 2 years of pretty hard, wet, late and a real slog, but this year ground conditions have been perfect for putting seed in the ground, and I know a lot of growers in the east have found that it's been a much more enjoyable season, and now the crops are coming out the ground. It is still very mild. We're standing here, it's 20 degrees in October. So now we've got the concerns of everything we're looking at with aphids and BYDV, but the crops are cutting out the ground, lots of energy going into them, so they should be going into winter in good state. But then again, BYDV and aphids is something that we've got to look at seriously. And the IPM, Integrated Pest Management trials that we're doing here with flowering margins, is something that we've got to really appreciate how to manage that going forward. Obviously, I don't want to be using insecticides. I've said that the best way to kill an insect is another insect, and so we've got to be very mindful about how we use insecticides going forward. Looking at next year, our trials are being repeated, so we're going to be looking at lowering inputs again with the tea timing trial that we did this year. We're looking at nitrate again with the legacy effect of the cover crops that have gone through the rotation, and if the nitrate is reappearing in the following crops, and then obviously the flowering margins assessments going forward. So still loads going on, and it's going to be another interesting year looking forwards.
So when building fungicide programs, it's really important to look at what is in the crop at the time and react appropriately to that as the season goes on, rather than starting off with a very set program which you maintain regardless of the conditions and how things change. In this year, the trial had very little disease in it overall. There was a little bit of septoria, and then some late season yellow rust did come in as we approached the T3 timing. Despite the low levels of disease in the trial, the best treatment was still the one that had the highest level of overall input. This was applied at both T1, T2 and T3. It was really clear that the T2 timing was, unsurprisingly, the most important timing in this trial. It's absolutely vital to maintain a programme approach when we're dealing with disease control. In the trial this year, it was more effective to reduce your inputs at every single timing, but maintain this T1, T2, T3 slots, rather than using higher inputs, but completely cutting out either one of those timings. It's really important for farmers and agronomists to be prepared to adapt and change throughout the season. This might go in two directions. You might be prepared and able to reduce your inputs at one timing, but actually in another you really need to be prepared to up them a little bit and see what's in front of you. I think this was most clear this year, where actually the T3 timing had a really good response to the higher input, whereas normally we can get away with a much lower programme.
We want to help farmers gain a better understanding of how flower margins can have a place on their farm as part of a nature-friendly, cost-effective IPM strategy. We want to give them the tools and skills to help them better monitor for pests and natural enemies on their farm. In the 3 fields that we monitored, no 2 fields were the same in terms of their pest or natural enemy abundance. Aphid numbers were low throughout the season, which meant that the natural enemies which feed on aphids were also low. But nonetheless, it was very clear that in the margins and in the crop itself, the ground was alive with insects, including ground beetles, money and wolf spiders, springtails and midges. Each of these species will have very different habitat preferences, and the floral resources on this farm provide for that. In midsummer, we also assessed the margins for plant species diversity. On one field we found 21 different species, and in another we found 19. The most common species were oxeye daisy, yarrow, wild carrot, as well as a wide range of grasses, so small timothy and 3 different types of fescue. And this wide range of species diversity will provide food, shelter and habitat for the many different insects that live on this farm all throughout the year. If you're thinking about creating habitats on farm or starting to monitor for natural enemies, start small. So place 1 or 2 pitfall traps in the margin or in the crop itself. Check them regularly once a week and get to know a few different species of insects. Review your landscape. Look for areas on the farm where floral resources are already available or where you could put them in. Strive for diversity and aim for a range of resources across the farm. Don't expect things to change overnight. It can take a couple of years for natural enemy and insect populations to build up. Attention to detail, a little bit of patience and lots of curiosity will ensure that you get the best results.
With the Environmental Land Management Scheme and the Sustainable Farming Initiative coming into play over the coming years, farmers are going to look to take small but not insignificant areas of land out of production and into schemes such as wildflower, woodlands, grassland and wetland management. Here at Brian's farm, we've been using his yield maps and field level input and fixed costs to identify parts of the farm that are potentially performing marginally economically. We can then use this marginal land map to compare the cost-benefit analysis with these schemes' payments. To create the marginal land map, we've used a method called clustering on Brian's 9 years of yield map data. This has looked for patterns in the dataset, identifying areas of the farm that perform the same over all years. We can then look at the economic performance of these clusters to identify as areas of the farm that most benefit from going into schemes. So on average we've found about 4 clusters per field, and what we can then do is identify the clusters that have performed the worst over the rotation and compare these to the cost of implementing such schemes. We can then also look at these margin maps and compare them to environmental risk maps such as those produced by the Norfolk Rivers Trust, and compare not only where the economic performance is worst across farm, but potentially also the highest environmental risk. And by potentially taking these areas out of production and into schemes, we are maximising economic benefit on farm and also minimising the environmental cost of production. A lot of growers have been collecting yield map data over a number of years. What we tried to do on Brian's farm is show how this can be used to make informed economic decisions across the farm. Growers can do this themselves by either having a look at their own yield map software or inputting into farm management software and looking at performance across years.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Nathan Morris and I've been leading the work at Strategic Farm East, looking at the cover crops. Cover crops can be an important tool in the toolbox for increasing the resilience of our soils and mitigating against diffuse pollution to watercourses. particularly nitrate losses. However, it is important to be able to assess these over a number of years and not just in a single year. And at SF East, the role of cover crops for reducing nutrient leaching across the rotation has been examined since 2018. The trial results from the Strategic Farm East for this season in 2021 have shown that the legacy effects of cover crops can demonstrate that a good performing crop, where there are no topsoil structural limitations, are likely to help mitigate against nitrate losses to water. When we're managing cover crops in a rotation, it will be important to take into consideration the previous crop's performance and the possibility of residual soil nitrogen in the system, particularly if yields were lower than expected. The decision of cultivation type and topsoil structure condition are also important to monitor in order to mitigate against nitrate leaching.
Welcome to AHDB's Strategic Cereal Farm for the West, hosted by Squab Hall Farm and former farm manager Rob Fox. Squab Hall Farm is located on some fairly heavy clays, and the weather is often a challenge. But for Harvest 2021, the trials went into the ground in good conditions. All of the oilseed rape established well and received one or no insecticides, and the same was for the wheat, with most of the areas receiving reduced amounts of insecticides. Crops fared well throughout a fairly wet winter, but through to March and beyond, the weather dried up and the farm received very little rain. However, we've got some really interesting results from the trials that we've been looking at for Harvest 2021, and our researchers are going to talk you through the key points from our cultivations trials, as well as our managed lower input trial, and also the monitoring work on pests and natural enemies.
Hi, my name is Chloe. This year I worked on the Managed Lower Inputs trial at Strategic Cereal Farm West. This trial was investigating the opportunity for the industry to reduce fungicide inputs when using more resistant varieties. In the field, half of the field was drilled X-days and the other half was siskin. Within each variety, 3 different fungicide programs were applied, designed to be low, medium and high input. Septoria was the dominant disease in the field, and we could see clear differences in the level of septoria between the 2 varieties, with higher severity in siskin than X-days, and this reflected the variety resistance ratings. However, the differences between the fungicide treatments within each variety were small. This was reflected in the yields, where X-days yielded more than siskin, however this was not found to be statistically significant. When we compared the different fungicide programs within each variety, again differences were small and not significant. So this suggested that the lowest input program was sufficient for both disease and yield in this situation. So the key take-home message for farmers and agronomists is that selecting varieties with high resistance ratings for disease reduces the risk of a damaging epidemic. Therefore, fungicide programs should be tailored to the variety and season to maximise margins.
I'm Damien Hatley, and I've been working on the cultivation trial at the Strategic Farm West. This trial was established in autumn 2018, and it aims to test the extent to which cultivation systems can be used to improve soil health, and particularly in promoting improved rooting to depth. Cultivations were carried out at 5, 15 and 30 centimetres in replicated strips, with a direct drill treatment which was added in the second year. Winter wheat was grown in years in the first year and in year 3. And in year 2, a winter oilseed rape crop failed to establish and was replaced by spring beans. Over the 3-year period, reducing cultivation depth from 15 centimetres, which is the normal farm practice, to 5 centimetres or direct drilling, reduced the wheat yield by ½ tonne a hectare, whilst increasing tillage to 30 centimetres showed no yield advantage. In terms of overall soil health, soil structural indicators in year 3 were much worse for the 5 centimetre cultivation than deeper tillage or direct drilling. Specific root traits in the spring and total root length at harvest were both found to be well correlated with final yield, which just emphasises the importance of monitoring what's going on below the soil surface as well as above the ground. More than anything, this project has highlighted some of the difficulties experienced in changing cultivation practice on a very challenging soil, particularly as the 3-year period included the wet autumn and winter of 2019. So the key take-homes from this experiment are firstly, regularly monitor your soil and be flexible with your cultivation strategy according to the conditions. Ensure that soil structure and particularly drainage are in the best possible shape before significantly reducing cultivation as a long-term strategy, and be prepared for some initial yield loss. And finally, you need to appreciate that converting to no-till is not an easy option, as the potential benefits are markedly influenced by climatic, soil and cropping differences.
Flowering strips help farmers by supporting a diversity and abundance of natural enemies across the farming landscape, and this helps to reduce the frequency of pest infestations building to damaging levels. Flowering strips also help to support wider biodiversity by providing a range of different resources and habitats within the farming landscape. The data we collected suggested the work at Strategic Farm West had improved the overall biodiversity of natural enemies across the farm rather than in individual fields. For farmers looking to establish floral strips on their farm, the most important thing is to make sure they plan exactly what they want to get out of those strips, because floral margins designed for promoting natural enemies can be quite different from those to promote general biodiversity. Different floral mixes within the margins will benefit different species, so it's important to pick plants and manage them according to what you want to achieve from the field margin. If you're looking to promote natural enemies and you want to get a diversity, you need to select a diversity of plants with a range of different floral components.
Here we are at Balburney Home Farms in Fife, Scotland. We're the AHDB Strategic Cereals Farm. We've just completed year one of the project, and primarily during that year we've been baselining data on the farm, looking at beneficial insects and pests, plant and crop health and nutrition, and also soil health using the VES scorecard. This information will be put to good use over the years to come as we progress through the project, so we can look back and see where we started as a business on this fundamental information, and we can see how we improve things over the years, and it can also be used to steer decisions for trials and what trials we run as the project progresses.
I'm Fiona Burnett from Scotland's Rural College, and I've been coordinating some of the AHDB work here on the strategic farm in Scotland, where we've been looking at the interplay between crop nutrition and plant health. And by trialling and doing regular testing through the season, we've really been encouraged in this first year of the work that we can pick up very small changes in plant health and plant nutrition, and identifying, for example, things like manganese deficiency way before we have symptoms. And we were also able to successfully reduce the fungicide inputs where we had those better nourished plants and lower disease risk with only minimal impact on yield. So in terms of the messages for next year coming from that, it really is the ability to target the fertiliser inputs both spatially in fields but also through time by combining the tissue testing with the soil testing results. And then to think about really targeting the fungicide inputs to those lower risk situations. So absolutely with something like Septoria, we can reduce the fungicide inputs and make savings on that front as well.
At Balburney, we're surveying the levels of natural enemies such as ground beetles and spiders and exploring how these predators impact on pests. We've focused on determining how these natural enemies use field margins and the adjacent fields. We know that the rough tussocky vegetation that is typically found in agricultural field margins provides excellent overwintering habitat for many predators. When these predators emerge in spring, they migrate into the adjacent fields, providing an important first line of defence against pests. At Balburney, we found a wide range of species active in the field margins in spring. However, not all of these species are active in the field centres. In spring, species with high dispersal capabilities, like money spiders, were found in good numbers in the field centres, while less mobile species, such as large ground-active wool spiders, took longer to disperse into the fields. Measures such as beetle banks provide winter harbourage in the field, and this is likely to ensure less mobile species are able to access the field centres in spring.
I hope you enjoyed this video tour of our strategic cereal farms in Fife, Suffolk and Warwickshire. For more information on the latest results from the trials for Harvest 2021, Join us for Strategic Cereal Farm Results Week. You can find all of the information online. Next year, for Harvest 22, our farms in Suffolk and Fife will be continuing the trials that they're looking at across a range of topics, including cover crops and reducing nitrate leaching, pest and natural enemies, managed lower inputs, crop nutrition and spring drilling. It's also the first year of our strategic cereal farm in the south, hosted by David Miller. David's trials have a strong focus on soil health and the link between soil health and crop health. He's already established his first 2 trials, the first one looking at cover crops and reducing nitrate leaching, and the second looking at amendments placed at drilling to boost soil health. For more information about all of the trials across our Strategic Cereal Farm programme, please visit the AHDB website.